Good morning. My name is Catherine Marshall. I'm an associate here at MacDonald and Associates. And today we're going to be talking about something that's made a lot of headlines in the past week, which is, of course, Doug Ford's plan to repeal essentially the majority of Bill 148. As we now know, in 2017, Kathleen Wynne and the Ontario Liberal government brought in Bill 148, which was referred to as the Fair Workplaces, Better Jobs Act. And Bill 148 made some significant sweeping changes to the Employment Standards Act and the labor landscape in Ontario. And Premier Ford has announced that he will, through Bill 47, which is called the Making Ontario Open for Business Act, he will in large part repeal the majority of Bill 148 with some exceptions, basically returning Ontario's employment and labor landscape back to the pre-Bill 148 status. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm going to kind of give like a high-level overview of what Doug Ford plans to repeal and what the significant and major impacts are going to be. So firstly, someone asked the question, when will Doug Ford's bill be passed? And it looks like it will be passed relatively quickly. I mean, they have a majority government. Probably the effects are going to take place in January of 2019. So I predict that the bill will receive royal assent in January. So that will return most of the employment law in this province back to the pre-Bill 148 status. A question I've been getting is, of course, why is the Ford government doing this? I mean, as we know, new governments will often come in and they'll change bills and they'll repeal legislation that the old government had brought in. And of course, the Ford government is doing a lot of that, and they're doing it quite rapidly. Bill 148 was a very controversial piece of legislation. It was quite unpopular with a lot of employers. It was seen as very unfriendly to employers and very employee friendly. Politically, some people said that, Kathleen Wynne, rammed through Bill 148 essentially in order to attempt to win over organized labor so that she could do well in the election. Well, we know how that ended up turning out. And many employers and small businesses said that they weren't properly consulted on Bill 148, that Bill 148 brought in way too many rapid changes that would have hurt their businesses significantly, and that everything was just too sudden. And this was especially in regard to the minimum wage increases that Bill 148 was bringing in. So it's not really a surprise that the Ford government is repealing most of it, given that it was quite unpopular with a lot of employers in the province, and was brought in so rapidly by the Wynne Liberal government. So a question I got is, what exactly is being repealed from Bill 148? And so I'm going to go over the significant portions of Bill 148 that are being repealed, because a lot of it's being repealed, but I just want to kind of give you the highlights. So the big one is minimum wage. As we know, Bill 148 increased minimum wage to $14 an hour and included an additional increase to $15 an hour, which would have been effective January 1st, 2019. So under Bill 47, which is Ford's bill that's repealing Bill 148, the $14 minimum wage is not going to change. That will be the current minimum wage, so it's not going to be rolled back. However, Bill 47 is eliminating the January 2019 increase to $15 an hour, and all future minimum wage increases beginning will basically start in 2020. So there's going to be no change to minimum wage until 2020, and it will be tied to inflation. It won't be something that the government just imposes on employers. So that's a big change. Another big thing that Bill 47 rolls back is the equal pay for equal work provision. So while employment standards provisions providing for equal pay on the basis of sex will be maintained, Bill 47 will repeal the requirement that equal pay for equal work on the basis of employment status, such as part-time or casual work. So this was a really controversial section of Bill 148. Basically, what it said was that employers cannot pay part-time employees less or differently than full-time employees. And of course, we know that a lot of employers have a lot of part-time employees. They've got casual employees, they've got seasonal employees. So this was a significant thing for a lot of employers, which they were saying would have cost them a lot of money. So that's no longer going to happen. Employers can continue to pay part-time workers differently than full-time workers. Another change that Bill 47 is doing is with respect to employee classification. So where there's a dispute as to whether an individual is an employee or an independent contractor, Bill 47 will repeal the reverse onus requiring an employer to prove that an individual is not an employee. So that was a significant thing that Bill 148 was doing, was it was creating the onus on employers to prove that their employee was an independent contractor and not an employee. So that is no longer going to be the case. The onus is going back to pre-1 Bill 48 times, where that onus is actually on the employee and not the employer. Another major change that Bill 47 is bringing in is personal emergency leave. So one of the big things that Bill 148 brought in was that they would, one of the more significant changes introduced under Bill 47 would result in the elimination of the 10 days of personal emergency leave, including 2 paid days provided under Bill 148. So this will be replaced by a total of 8 unpaid leave days per year, 3 days per year for personal illness, and 3 days per year for family responsibilities, such as illness, issues involving children, spouse, personal things, family related things, and 2 days per year for bereavement leave. So employers would once again be allowed also to require a doctor's note as reasonable evidence for sick leave. This was going to be prohibited under Bill 148. So employers were not going to be allowed to ask for a doctor's note for evidence, if one of their employees went on sick leave. This is no longer the case. Employers can still do this. So this is significant. I know I got a lot of questions about this because as we know, Bill 148 did bring in a lot of provisions for more emergency personal leave time. So right now under Bill 47 is a total of 8 unpaid leave days per year that people are getting, and 2 days per year of bereavement leave. So that's a significant change. Another big change that Bill 47 is doing is it's changing the scheduling provisions that Bill 148 brought in. So what it's basically doing is it's modifying the 3-hour rule for minimum pay when an employee is required to report to work. So Bill 47 is basically repealing Bill 148, which had said that starting January 1st, 2019, employees have a right to request changes to their schedules or work location, are allowed to get at least 3 hours pay for being on call if the employee is available but not called into work, and which also would have allowed employees the right to refuse to work on a day that they are not scheduled, and to work with less than 96 hours notice, and also 3 hours pay for, in the event that their shift gets canceled within 48 hours. So it is bringing back the status quo from before Bill 148 time. The Bill 47 is also repealing a lot of the changes that Bill 148 made to the Labor Relations Act. I'm not going to get into that today. I don't do labor law, and you know, that's something that we just don't specialize at this firm in. But there are a lot of, you know, for those of you who are in a unionized environment, collective bargaining environment, there are a lot of changes. So that's something you can look up on the website, on Bill 47's website, and see the changes that are being enacted. I got a question, what is actually staying under Bill 148? There are some things that are staying. The increase of paid vacation entitlement to 3 weeks after 5 years of service is remaining. In addition, the government is going to keep intact the leave provisions relating to domestic and sexual violence. And that's a really great thing. We talked about that in our last webinar, the domestic and sexual violence leave, which does allow employees to take a leave of absence in the event that they have been sexually assaulted or the victim of domestic violence or one of their loved ones has been. So that is remaining. And I did get a question, has there been any mention about repealing or changing the Pay Transparency Act? And this was definitely a controversial provision of Bill 148. So what Bill 148 was doing was and it was scheduled to come into force in January 2019, it would make it illegal for prospective employers to ask job interview candidates about their current or previous earnings, and would force companies to state a salary range in all publicly advertised job postings. So it's still not clear if that is going to remain the law. Now, CBC News did ask the Ontario Labour Minister, Laurie Scott, about this. He said that they're looking at the Pay Transparency Act to see how it fits overall with businesses and how they can make it work, and that the government is committed to the principle of pay transparency, but they're looking at the timing. And I think if anything gets changed with respect to the changes that Bill 148 made to the Pay Transparency Act, it'll probably be regarding the timing of when those changes come into force, because they were supposed to come into force January 1st, 2019, but what the government is indicating is that it's likely that those provisions will stay, but that the timing will be different. So it's going to possibly be more delayed when that comes into force. So I'll keep you guys updated on that. If we hear anything else from the government or in the media about, you know, whether or not the Pay Transparency Act amendments get rolled back as well. So those are the main points of Bill 47. Those are the highlights of what's getting repealed. Like I said earlier, we believe these changes will come pretty fast, and you know, there are some components that are remaining, but for the most part, everything is getting rolled back. And if you want a more detailed like briefing note or breakdown as to what's getting rolled back and what's staying, please email the firm, and I'd be happy to provide you some more detail, because it's, you know, not something you can go into a lot of detail during one of these webinars. You know, otherwise, I hope I've answered your questions and given you a good overview. And thanks so much for tuning in, and we will let you know what our next webinar is about, which will be in a month. So, and if you have some ideas as to what topic you want to hear us speak about, please let us know. And again, thank you so much for tuning in.